Councillor Rebecca, just checking you can hear online.
I can, Mayor. Can you hear me?
Thank you. Loud and clear. Thanks very much. Well, councillors, good afternoon and welcome to the special meeting of council. One particular subject this afternoon in regard to the Inland Rail Environmental Impact Statement submission. So welcome to councillors. Welcome to Acting CEO, Jake Passio. Welcome to you. And for your first ordinary meeting of council, General Manager of Planning and Development, Ed Johnson. Welcome to you, Ed. Thank you. And to other staff, those who are in the room, both officers and folk watching, thank you very much for being here. And of course, this is live streamed and will be available as well for those to view either live or as the recorded footage as well. I begin by acknowledging the Aboriginal parties whose songlines traverse these lands we meet on today, the Western Waka Waka, Guyabal, Jarrawa and Bigambul peoples, and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging, for they hold the knowledge, rich traditions and bold ambitions of Australia's first people. Councillors, we move to item number 2, which is the attendance, including apologies, leave of absence, granting leaves of absence and declaration of conflicts of interest. We have no apology received, noting Councillor Rebecca is online and Councillor Melissa Taylor had a leave of absence recorded at a previous meeting, so no resolution is required. Are there any councillors who'd wish to notify of any other leave of absence forthcoming? If not, we move then to the declarations of prescribed or declarable conflicts of interest, of which there's been none advised. If there's something that crops up, certainly we can raise it at that time. So councillors, we move to item number 3, which is the substantive item for today, which is Inland Rail Economic Impact Statement submission. And I've got authors of Katrina, Emily and John actually here. So councillors, I'll hand over. Who is, would you straight over to Emily? Emily, welcome again to you. Thank you for being here. So I'll hand over to you, Emily, and then we'll go to questions after you present. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor, CEO, councillors, council staff and attendees. I wish to present the council report and attached submission to the Inland Rail Revised Environmental Impact Statement made on behalf of council. The Inland Rail project is a 1,600 kilometre rail network designed to support fast and efficient freight movement between Melbourne and Brisbane. The project consists of 12 sections, 2 within our region. The segment under review today is the Border to Gowrie section, which traverses through towns including Millmerran, Brookstead, Pittsworth, and crosses over both Goondiwindi Shire Council and Toowoomba Regional Council. The 217 kilometre Border to Gowrie section of the project includes 149 kilometres of new track and 68 kilometres of upgrades. By 2040, up to 25 trains per day are anticipated, with train lengths up to 1.8 kilometres long. Council was first involved with the Inland Rail EIS with input into the terms of reference in 2018. The first draft EIS was released for the public review in May 2021, with Council making a submission, in January 2021, with Council making a submission in May 2021. The Coordinator General's review of those submissions, plus changes to the reference design influenced by social and environmental constraints, necessitated an updated revised EIS. It is important to note that the revised EIS response only addresses the rail line itself and does not include freight hubs, workers' accommodation and intermodal links. Public consultation commenced on May 12 and was to run for 8 weeks. To date, there has been a deputation from Australian Track Rail Corporation on the 11th of June to present their revised EIS. There have also been 2 CISs, one on the 4th of February outlining Council's process and one held on the 30th of June to present the submission to councillors. Place Branch has coordinated input from across council departments with relevant expertise through an internal working group with the support of an environmental consultant to prepare the submission. The making of this resolution will ensure that Council's representations relating to Inland Rail Revised EIS are represented to the Coordinator General for review and consideration. We are taking the record of materials, the submission and the report as have been read. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. I note also that we have Lucas and Will here from Range Environmental who can answer any questions as well. So appreciate you being here as well. Council, is there any questions or comments on the submission that is also included in the attachment number 2? Any questions? Councillor Tim.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a question. Good afternoon, officers. The second part talks about delegate authority to the General Manager to make minor or inconsequential amendments should the need arise. I just wanted to talk through the need to possibly make more than minor or inconsequential amendments. And I'm talking around a review of South East Queensland Regional Growth Plan and noting places like Section 14 of our submission talk about this going right next to the proposed priority infrastructure area for council, and Section 29 of the report talk about we may be putting in our plans a lot of houses and perhaps a lot of trunk infrastructure, including water mains, near this area. So if that comes back when our South East Queensland Regional Plan changes, if any, come through, and we need to say, hang on, we've got a growth front planned here. Would a change in that be minor or inconsequential, perhaps through your chair to Ed, or do we need to change those wordings should a larger change be required?
Thank you, Councillor. Through the chair, I would hazard a guess that the minor and inconsequential amendments provides council comfort that the submission substantively remains the same around the critical points raised. If there were more or if there were additional items to be raised as a result of the SEQ regional plan or substantive shifts to issues discovered as this process commences, I suspect would be coming back through council for further discussions and information sessions. And I guess it provides council that assurance that that will occur through the normal channels.
Thanks for that, Ed, and congratulations on day 3 in our organisation. Chair, I don't have any more questions, but I would like to speak generally to it at the appropriate time should it be available. Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Shine.
Yeah, no, thanks, Chair. Not too sure to whom the question should be directed, but there are a couple of aspects of the report that I wanted to concentrate on, and in fact restricted. The questions are restricted to the area adjacent to Pittsworth, as has been used inland rail route, sort of deviates after passes more trailers on the rise on the southwestern side of Pittsworth, and then tends to join, or not join, but run parallel and close to the Gore Highway for some considerable distance. What's proposed in the submission here is that instead of doing that, it proceed probably on a straight line from where more trailers at the top of the hill there is to Athol and further east, with a distance approximately 1 kilometre from the Gore Highway, I think, or from Pittsworth. I'm not too sure which, but assuming it's the Gore Highway they're referring to. Just if that's what's being that is what's being proposed by inland by this submission as opposed to inland rail. Just weighing what a number of effects might flow from that. First of all, the economic effects to the farms that will be the subject of resumption, no doubt, or parts of them. The economic consequences to those ratepayers in our region who will be affected by a fairly significant transgression across quite a number of properties, as I can see. Has any estimate been done or any consultation with the owners of those properties to get their feedback on this this aspect of it, or whether they're in favour of it or what assumes against it, and if the reasons why?
So can I just refer to the item, it looks like at number 29 in the submission. Would that be correct? Councillor Sean, with the map on page, I think it's page 18 of our report. It's up on the screen, yeah. So it's
Yep.
number 29.
Yeah.
Just so we're talking the same thing, that's all.
Yeah. The map I've got is beyond my capacity to read it to any great extent, but
It's
I
the
can
same
see-
one that's up on the screen. Can you just drag Deanne, can you just shift the screen so you can see the map, just to see if that's the same one? Yeah. That's the one? Yeah, so
that is the same one, and the Gore Highway is the line running west to east on the left-hand left-hand side of the screen. One assumes, not assumes that it is. Yeah.
So that is the one. So just above that, there should be a number that says 29. So it's the 29th, submission number 29. Just go up to the page before on the left-hand side.
Yep.
Submission 29.
Yep.
That's it? Good.
Yep.
So we're all talking about the same thing.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
That's all right. No problem.
I'm with
Thanks.
you. Yep.
Lucas, hand over to you. Is that the case? Or thanks. Just that microphone. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll take this through the chair. Thanks for your question, councillor. It's a good point. It is a position that council put forward in 2019 about the alignment at Pittsworth not being acceptable to council. So in a submission to an inquiry in 2019, council put forward the position of relocating the alignment at Pittsworth at least 1 kilometre at the time, was provided just as an example of council's expectations on the separation distance between that alignment and Pittsworth. So at this point, it's a commonly made request throughout the submission. So it's obviously discussed in more detail at item 29, but it is made in a few different locations throughout the response to the revised draft EIS. The wording of it is such that for both Pittsworth and Brookstead, council would like to see those alignments moved further away to reduce the impacts on the townships to a distance that's acceptable to council. So we're not necessarily specifying a distance in the recommendation. We would like to see it further away. Ultimately, the decision to push the proponent to look at an alignment change lies with the Coordinator General. Council can only make the request. The Coordinator General has to take that position with the proponent. In terms of the impacts of that alignment change, you're correct. Obviously, moving it does introduce other potential impacts. It is that the trade-off, I suppose, between the impacts on a larger township like Pittsworth, and there obviously be impacts to other affected landowners, but that would be something the proponent needs to consider further through consultation and also with the Coordinator General.
Yeah, no, fine. But well, I suppose the answer to my question is we don't have any information in relation to what the costs might be associated with such resumptions or economic interruption.
No, that's correct.
Okay.
Councillor Simon, just before you go on the next one, that probably highlights a little bit further up on the screen up here, on your screen. So the alignment, current alignment is marked there, and then the red line to the north of that area is that 1 kilometre area from that, within that band.
On the far left, I think, is where basically the more trailers that I referred to is probably situated further left again to that. But for this purpose, the current proposed line will run for this purpose anyway, adjacent to the Gore Highway. Yeah. Thank you, Chair. in terms of that was the economic issue, the safety issue. If you look at the number of intersecting streets there, or roads, to the left of the Gore Highway, that the red line, that is what we're suggesting, the route should be diverted to. On my looking at the map before, it will cross French Road, Quebet Road, Oakey Pitsworth Road, Norman Road, Lochaber Road, St Helens Road, Stoneleigh Road, Volan Road, and there's a creek called 14 Mile Creek, I think, which would be in its path. There might be further along towards Athol on the right that we can't see there. My point, my inexpert feeling is that the diversion would increase the number of consequent crossovers of those roads, because of that would not occur if it was adjacent to the Gore Highway, because it would form part of the existing intersections. Very much as a layman, I say all of that. But what my point is, I think that there is a considerable number of roads that would be more adversely affected than otherwise. Would you agree with that, Lucas?
I'll just take it through the chair. Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, so I guess just with that, the map that the Mayor was presenting earlier, that dashed red line, that is, it's only indicative. It's just the study area boundary. It's just shown just to provide some context as to roughly where a kilometre lies from the current alignment. So the current alignment is the blue line. The red line is really just to give it a rough idea. So it's not sort of suggested that that's where the line track. Yes, I take your point. There could be more roads where there's interfaces with the rail network, but I guess that's where it comes down to the whole balancing of impacts against a population the size of Pitsworth. Yeah. There will be consequential impacts of moving that away that are different to what's being experienced in the proposed alignment.
Okay. Whether it's within your area of expertise or not, I'm just concerned about, well, I'm interested about the noise differential between the up to 24 trains a day and the multitude of semi-trailers that go past on the Gore Highway constantly, any time of day or night, really, in my limited experience. And I'm not really familiar with the noise level of a train of this nature, but I am familiar with the semi-trailers, as everyone here would be. Is there a marked difference between the noise levels?
Thank you, Chair. So yes, I suppose the noise emissions is a few different things to consider when we look at the train. So one of it is the length of the train. So the length, 1.8 kilometres long. I'm not sure what speed they're likely to be doing through this particular section, but it ranges from 80 to 115 kilometres an hour. So it's roughly from a 1 minute to a 1 minute 20 pass by time for that train to leave the pass by point. So there's the duration of an event versus something like road traffic. A single train pass by can take a minute for that noise to remove itself from the source, from the receptor. Obviously, in time, looking at a frequency of potentially a train per hour at peak capacity. And the other thing that we have in mind is that the criteria that are being used in the current assessment, we think won't reflect the true noise impacts of the project. So at the moment, our concern in the submission is that there's a small number of receptors that would be eligible for mitigation from the noise impacts, but we believe there's going to be a great number of other receptors affected. So I guess the reason for looking at a push further from the town is to get that separation distance and try to alleviate the impacts, particularly of noise on the residents of Pitsworth, because in the current scenario, with a criteria of 55 decibels being their trigger for action to mitigate a property or whatnot, we believe there's a whole raft of receptors between 44 decibels and 55, which is a range that, based on World Health Organization data, we think will be experiencing sleep disturbance or potentially experiencing sleep disturbance. But for that big band of houses in that range of noise criteria, they won't be eligible for noise mitigation. So at the moment, they're predicting 169 houses along the alignment, that's from Gundy through to Gowrie, would be impacted. Around 20% of those are currently in the Pittsworth area, and the concern is that there's a raft of houses that won't be eligible for mitigation, but will potentially be impacted by noise. And then we also have the potential effects of restricting growth at Pittsworth by almost quarantining those 2 growth zones that are noted in Council's regional growth plan.
So just to clarify that, just to explain, if you could, the reason why some of those houses are not eligible for mitigation.
Sure. So they're using a threshold of 55 decibels as a point of where they take mitigation. So when they get to the detailed design, they'll do further modelling and identify the receptors where they're expecting 55 decibels or greater to be received from the operational phase of the project. Dwellings that are beneath 55 won't be eligible for their mitigation package. So mitigation could be whether it's through the use of noise barriers, whether it's at source through changing windows or other bits and pieces at dwellings. But the concern is that there's going to be a whole raft of residents impacted because, like we might have mentioned the other day, 44 decibels is where the World Health Organization suggests sleep disturbance occurs from rail projects. So between 44 and 55 decibels, there's a lot of dwellings in that space, but most of them fall beneath 55. So, and they do note this in their document that there is a bit of a balancing act for them between the criteria they're using, which is endorsed by the Environment Department. It is endorsed criteria, but that doesn't help the man on the ground in terms of sleep disturbance.
I suppose my question, what's questioning, the reason behind my questioning is there much difference between the noise of the train on top of the semi-trailers who, they're not one an hour, they're one every minute probably, well, yep, several minutes or whatever. It's constant anyway. Your experience is will there be much difference, added noise because of that?
Yeah, there is a slight difference. There is an ambient existing noise environment in Pittsworth that residents will be somewhat accustomed to. This is introducing a new source. It's a different source in terms of the noise source compared to road traffic versus rail traffic. It's a different style of noise source and sound. It's going to be occurring quite frequently for quite a long pass-by time.
Yeah. No, thank you. There has been investigation as to the environmental risks to the fauna in the area. Has that, I take it that study has been carried out with respect to the indicated proposed route as opposed to the possible route that we would in the submission like to see. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the studies have focused on their blue line, which is the proposed alignment. They wouldn't have assessed the impacts of moving it elsewhere, further afield.
No, thank you. Thanks, Lucas.
Thanks, Councillor Sean. Further questions, councillors? Councillor Trevor?
Councillor Kerry's covered a few bits that I was going to raise, a number of train speeds, lengths of train. How wide are the corridors from fence line to fence line within the whole project?
It does vary depending on the nature of the infrastructure. About 30 metres it'll come down to in places.
As in 15 metres each side of the rail line. And how is that fenced? Like when we get into these fauna areas, are fauna be able to just trot across the rail lines, or are they going to be screened in so they have to go into an underpass or whatever?
I might just hand you to Will for this.
Okay, thank you, Will.
Welcome, Will.
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. So Inland Rail have committed to a number of measures through a fauna connectivity strategy, and it highlights their fencing and underpass approaches. They've yet to prepare a formal management plan that actually denotes exactly where those underpasses and fauna-friendly fences will go, but they have committed to providing fauna-friendly fencing through certain areas and underpasses suitable for fauna movement. One of the components that we have sought for the Office of Coordinator General to impose is that where they're installing fauna-sensitive infrastructure, so fences, underpasses, potential rope bridges for things like possums to get across it where it fragments habitat, we've asked for those works to be done in accordance with the Department of Transport and Main Roads Fauna-Sensitive Design Guideline and also the state government's Koala-Sensitive Design Guideline. So where they're installing that infrastructure, we've sought that to be conducted in accordance with best practice with how Transport and Main Roads would do it if they were doing the project themselves.
Just following on, in New South Wales, obviously the line's been well and truly constructed or is under construction. Are we following along the same guidelines, or is it a state-by-state issue, or is it a federal government issue?
Predominantly, the train line we expect from what it looks like in New South Wales to Queensland will look relatively similar. So if you've seen it in the northern parts of New South Wales, it's quite it's a raised mound with culverts where required for drainage purposes, and then it typically has standard rural stock fencing along the outside, so that's permeable for most of your wildlife species, so kind of 3 or 4 strand wire. In certain areas where it moves through urban areas, it's more of a security type fence to stop residential movement into the corridor, but we generally expect it will look pretty similar to what we've seen or what's visible to the public in New South Wales.
And relating to the decibel, 45 to 55, is that under the same parameters as New South Wales, or are we different here, or are they different, or?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor. New South Wales is using the same threshold of 55 decibels. So 44 is a World Health Organisation guideline. It was referenced in the draft EIS, but they haven't followed through with it in this current EIS. They're using a national health guideline as well, which is referred to in the Environment Department's EIS guidance. So it's an accepted guideline that the Environment Department use. But our concern is that for a township of Pittsworth and Brookstead size, that a threshold of 55, it's a trigger point for mitigation, but it doesn't mean those below that are not going to experience sleep disturbance. The concern is that if World Health Organisation has identified 44 decibels as a point at which you might have sleep disturbance, and that's potentially a lot of receptors who are going to be experiencing sleep disturbance, and there's lots of research around the, I guess, consequential and chronic health effects of sleep disturbance. So there's a flow-on effect of that.
And from what I gather, some houses are just going to miss out on any help whatsoever, and others will be helped via fencing, as in panel fencing. How does that panel fencing go if you're on a sort of a flood zone where that will then become a barrier?
It's a good point. There's lots of concerns around the lack of, and it's understandable not to have the full detail around some of these mitigation measures at this point, but the mitigation measures themselves can have other impacts. So whether it's flooding, whether it's visual, whether it's affecting fauna movement, the nature of mitigation will depend on a literally house-by-house basis, depending on the noise levels they're being exposed to, whether it can be treated at the house through changing of windows or some additional facade works, or whether it's a barrier, additional barrier works at the rail line itself.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Trevor. Councillor James, question?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Just whilst we've sort of been talking a lot about this alignment through you, I wouldn't mind asking if the General Manager of Infrastructure Services might want to add any comment to this, because as was mentioned before, this alignment, and as it's not a new request or a new position of TRC, in fact, it said it was a part of that Senate inquiry, which Mr. Brady actually presented to on behalf of Toowoomba Regional Council, and then and the reasons around it as sort of listed again in this submission. It's not only about future urban growth and things like that, but it's obviously, I think the theme of where we went with it all, the submission was around looking at the route that's best practice, et cetera, but has minimal impact on the maximum amount of people. So just the fact that we've been talking a lot on this point, through you, I wouldn't mind if he has anything further to add to this, because it's obviously a key part of, I know it's a long submission with a lot of different recommendations, but again, as I said, when we're talking about representing people that's around that, wanting to have minimal impact on the maximum amount of people.
Oh, thanks, James. Happy to answer that, Mike. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. I'll probably just support what Lucas spoke to. He covered it off very well and substantially, all the points. I'd probably just add the current vertical alignment past Pittsworth is a raised embankment. So it's up around in the order of about 10 metres. So that actually further adds to the issue of noise with the semi-trailers, and that from a noise perspective, they're at a road level, which that noise still does carry. But once you actually elevate noise, and in this case, as you go past Pittsworth, it's potentially up to 10 metres up in the air, which is twice the height of this ceiling, you might as well say. That noise radiates out for a very much a longer distance, and the practicalities of putting barriers on an embankment that's already 10 metres high, those sorts of things are very difficult, and aesthetically would be an issue as well. The best way to attenuate noise is to stop it at the source if you can, and they are looking at, from a locomotive point of view, the sorts of locomotives they use will be probably the most modern ones they can do. So they are looking at those sort of things. But then you also have track noise. So they're also trying to have minimal, you might call joints, and different things like that actually make the noise happen, if you know what I'm trying to say there. Ultimately, distance is probably the next key way to try to solve the problem, because noise attenuates over distance. We're not saying it's a kilometre. I think the wording of the recommendation going to the Coordinator General is quite general. It's trying to get them to think a lot more in depth about the issue of noise, and also the location of the track, but that's not just also in the horizontal, but also in the vertical. So they may be better to be going through, putting a lot more cuttings through as they go past, particularly Pittsworth. There's probably opportunity. Brookstead, very flat country, they won't be doing cuttings there, but those sorts of things, we want them to look a lot more into the design to mitigate those impacts.
Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And while we're on that subject, if Mr Brady wouldn't mind, my concerns following on from Councillor James is Brookstead has always been a grain siding, but what is planned for there with this, and I know I think we have it as covered as well as we can with our requests, is that what this would do, should it become, and I know GrainCorp has plans for it to become a large grain depot, a terminal with trains to be hooked up, but that will cause gridlock in the settlement of Brookstead. So that is of grave concern to me, not just the noise, but the fact that people won't be able to move in and around Brookstead with trains being filled, double stacked, waiting to be picked up by the engines as they go past. So I think I think we've got it as well covered as we can, but I think that also is something that needs to be pulled out and thought about, because there are a lot of, it's quite a centre there. The Gore Highway is over to the side. If there should be a train, a 1 kilometre train pulled up through there, you won't be able to cross the railway tracks or get to the highway or those sorts of things. I think that's worthy of being pulled out and talked about as well. Thank you.
So, Mike, would you like to just touch on that? I think it's a valid point that Councillor Carroll has mentioned, and particularly, Mike, I'd be keen to understand the impacts when the works need to be done north of Brookstead onto the line, and what impact that could have on our road network during that construction phase.
Yeah, again, we've sort of, just from the submission, I'll come back to the question a little bit more, but from the submission point of view, we have tried to pick up on the issues of the impacts on Brookstead. Brookstead's a little bit different, as I said, to Pittsworth. It has a lot of similar issues, the noise and all those, and again, separation there as much as reasonably possible would be a big positive, but it's potentially the cumulative impacts onto Brookstead that through earlier discussions with, I think it's GrainCorp, I'm going back quite a number of years now, I have tried to make more recent contact, just waiting for them to get back. But they did have plans of they called it a super depot. Whether that is still part of their plans, unsure, but that would allow the import-export of grain through Brookstead. So Brookstead's a small town, not much bigger than a village in many cases, but people do live there, and the way the current road network is in Brookstead, how you get across the railway line to load or unload grain and the like, would see, we believe, numerous trucks just filling up the streets of Brookstead in the future whilst they're waiting to unload or load. So this sort of cumulative impact of everything happening in one spot is not really covered by the EIS in any sense. All we can do at this stage is sort of bring it to attention of the Coordinator General and get them to ensure that when the next step after the EIS is that in those conditions that those sort of matters are better taken into account when it comes to the design and the alignment.
Thanks, Mike. While you're there, Mike, Councillor Shine might have a further question.
Yeah, my first question actually to Mr. Brady. Just looking at that map there, Brookstead, the green indicates the proposed route, and the yellow represents the existing highway, the Gore Highway. Is that correct? I could have it wrong.
The gold colour
Yeah.
is the Gore Highway.
Yes.
The sort of yellow under green that you've got there is the existing rail corridor. So the intent of Inland Rail through this section is to use as much of the current corridors reasonably possible. Okay, so they basically build within the current rail corridor through this section, is the proposal at this stage.
The current rail corridor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Possibly a little bit of extra widening past Brookstead. I think it's a separation of 60 metres or something. In the order of a small separation.
I take it from what you said, the major concern is the bank up of grain trucks in appropriate season. How would you overcome that problem there? What suggestion would you make?
Look, the way to work it out is the whole sort of transport, intermodal sort of planning for Brookstead has to be done as a whole, not set parts in isolation, not Inland Rail in isolation, not GrainCorp in isolation, not just the town. And obviously they've got to take those major types of developments, have got to take into account how it impacts onto the town. TMR obviously is a major player stakeholder in this as well, because the access is on and off the highway, it's high speed through there. Plus, with the Gore Highway overpass proposed over the rail, that changes our accesses into the town of Brookstead. So there's lots of change. Unfortunately, at the moment, those changes are being somewhat looked at in isolation rather than sort of being brought together from a planning perspective and you know, just working through the issues. It could have other impacts on other infrastructure there as well.
Would the proposed line on the existing track be partly done to utilise the existing grain silos that may well be there, or things of that nature? I don't know if they are.
Yeah, the proposed line, I think, has a small separation, 60, 80 metres to the east of the existing line. One of the elements that we have picked up on is that they do join the existing grain terminal line at the northern end of Brookstead, but they don't have a southern connection. We have picked up on that needs to be properly connected, north and south ends, for that to work as a terminal. So I think it's great that a location like that could evolve to be a significant terminal, but those impacts need to be looked at from an cumulative perspective and managed and mitigated.
Thank you.
Councillor Trevor?
Just a couple questions. We're talking about the border to Gary. Where at Gary-ish are we talking as the finish point for this section? Is it Gary, Charlton? Where is the exact point? Does anyone sort of know what we're talking about today?
Mike might clarify that one.
Yeah, councillors, at border to Gary actually finishes in Charlton. It finishes just at roughly Draper Road. Yeah, Draper Road, which, if you know Interlink SQ, which has been proposed, Stoker Road, which has been a proposed intermodal for many years. It finishes just on the western side of that, and basically at this stage in the EIS does not join the Western Rail. Gary to Helidon, which is the tunnel section, starts from that point on. So again, we've picked that up in the submission, and we've said that that element has to be how that rail ends, inverted commas, at least from a, you might call it, temporary perspective or interim perspective, needs to be considered, and it needs to join into the western line, obviously.
Thanks for that. And follow-up question. With all these crossings on roads and highways and trains doing between 80 and 115 kilometres per hour, what sort of signage, drop-down things, flashing lights, what's going to be used and who is paying for that? Is Inland Rail paying for all those bits, even across our roads, state roads?
Yeah, so the pay for question is yes, Inland Rail's paying for everything, and we're pretty consistent in our message there as far as that's concerned. In regards to the state road network, they have grade separation on all state roads where there is railroad interface. So as I just mentioned, Brookstead, so that's a road bridge over rail. With respect to Council's road network, we have at this stage approximately 30 interfaces, road rail interfaces, substantial, not quite half, grade separated or changed, so which is very positive in respect to our network. The other half are what they call active crossings, which is your boom gates. So all the signalling and everything that goes and the crossings that go with that. We're also looking at, from a council perspective, that we don't want unnecessary ownership of assets from a depreciation perspective of new assets. So we're very conscious of ensuring that those elements are also considered exactly what we own after it's built. So trying to mitigate that to really just the road approaches to within 6 metres or so of rail line, so within either side of the corridor.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Councillor Carroll. Well, you might
Thank you,
stay
Mr.
there, Mike.
Yeah, but look, I don't want to labour the point on Brookstead, but we have to understand what we're thinking about here. The trains are up to 1.5 kilometres long. If it's a big grain season, these are going to be preloaded, double-stacked containers on a line that will last for up to a kilometre, maybe more. So when we're talking about that, and Councillor Gowrie knows Brookstead very well, but it could just tie up the whole of the way traffic moves in and around that locality. So we need to be thinking about that. And Mr. Brady's right when he says that these things cannot be looked at in isolation. If somebody wants to get from this side of the highway to the other side of the highway, and there's a line there with a kilometre waiting to be picked up in an hour or so, it is really a consideration we should be thinking about, as should the Coordinator General. So without labouring it, and I know through you, Mr Mayor, to Hayley and the team, that they've done the best they can to condition this, but I think it comes back to the fact that the cumulative effects of these things, we're not just talking about the grain trucks, we're talking about the actual carriages that are sitting there waiting to be picked up or being loaded, and there's not a lot of room in there. So, I think we need to be really mindful to try to get our point across. Don't think we can do any more. I'm not saying that you haven't done that well enough, but I think it's something we need to keep in the back of our minds and talk about, because I think Brookstead, Pittsworth with noise and vibrations is an issue. We're concerned about that, and we're talking about moving, suggesting it be moved. But at Brookstead, it should a big super depot come to pass, and it'd be wonderful for our community, the increase in the ag produce that's here, and in a big season, that's going to be a huge concern for the way people move in and around Brookstead, with the not just the carriages, the trucks, and everything else that's there. So I don't know, do you think we could add anything else, or do you think we've got it covered? I think we have, but I think in conversations to follow, there's probably the opportunity then to press for some cumulative considerations. Thanks.
I think Council just needs to keep in mind that the trains are up to 1.8 kilometres long. That Inland Rail is a national transformational project. It's fantastic from that perspective. It gives a backbone to the network, a fantastic backbone, which will enable other rail connectivity and enable other rail connectivity. So I know we're looking at this again in an EIS very much as Inland Rail, 26 trains a day, but I could assure you from day one there's going to be other users of this rail. There's going to be a lot of grain coming onto this rail, like for instance from Thallon and from those sorts of areas. That'll come straight on. They'll come on at Yalarbin or thereabouts, and that'll join and that'll come down through our city. Okay, so there's going to be a lot of opportunity for other rail users, both the public rail users and also private rail users, to utilise this line, and that has been one of the key economic drivers of this project, is the ability for transformational change in how we actually transport freight, produce in this nation. And from that perspective, it's absolutely fantastic, but its impact as it goes through on communities and that. And I mean, when we talk about Brookstead and Pittsworth, even the tiny spot likes of Pampers and those sorts of things will feel effects. So that tends to be more individual houses, but still small communities. So we're not trying to be ignorant of those either.
And thank you, Mr. Brady, because I think it's really something that most of our community doesn't really understand. 1 kilometre train will take 48 B-doubles off the road, and the freight task is set to at least double by in the next 15 years. Our roads can't take it, and this would be amazing, but we need to be wide awake about doing the best we can to get it right when they go through. Thank you.
Thank you. No, it's a very valid point, and I agree totally with the commentary, Mike and Carol, in regard to that, and I'm sure we all do. I guess with EIS submissions, you're always looking for things of how it will impact in a negative way, but there's certainly plenty of reasons why it will impact in a positive way as well if you look at that. So that needs to be balanced. Any more questions, councillors? If I could, Lucas and Will, on in our report on issues and responses, it talks about the highlighted areas, noise and vibration we've spoken about. There's two I'd like to pull out for you to just explain a little bit further. The first of which is around light, and particularly around Mount Kent Observatory. And the second one is in regard to flood modelling. The hydrology of this, particularly along the Condamine floodplains, has been an issue for residents since day one. And I just wanted councillors, and myself particularly in this instance, as I'm asking the question, to see how far this has moved from our first submission, 2019, and what happened there, to where we are today, given this is the revised EIS. So two questions, one around light and what we've put in, and the second around the hydrology and the flood mapping. If you could just talk about those two things.
No worries, thank you, Mr. Chair. I might ask Rod or Mike perhaps to speak on the flooding comments there, but happy to talk on light. So with the lighting impact assessment that's been conducted, there was a couple of concerns, and probably the main one is Mount Kent, like you mentioned, Mr. Chair, and Councillor Taylor has mentioned previously as well. So Mount Kent Observatory is not part of the EIS assessment. It's been excluded from the lighting impact assessment because during the studies they've determined that it's 21 kilometres from the rail alignment. So the proponent determined that it's not at a significant enough risk to be impacted by the light emissions from the rail network. Our lighting specialist spoke with the observatory a fortnight ago to discuss the project with them to validate whether this separation distance was adequate to minimise impacts to their research. They were concerned by the source of light to be introduced by the project. So we have identified in the submission that we do believe further consultation is needed between the proponent and Mount Kent, because the observatory are concerned that this additional light source will affect their research. Like we've mentioned in the submission, it is a facility of international significance, assisting projects with NASA and other entities like that. So it's a significant asset for the region, and I guess something that the proponent needs to factor into when they're designing this. The other concerns we had raised around the lighting assessment was that some of the methods used to assess the change of light at receptors, we think might be underestimating those impacts. So we have suggested alternate methods they could be using to more accurately assess the light changes at receptors in some of these areas which would experience very dark conditions normally. So we've just suggested that they amend their technique for assessing light impacts at receptors. And I might...
Thanks, Lucas. So they're items 31 to 34 within the submission. So it's a fair chunk of the submission in regard to that. Mike, would you like to just touch on the hydrology and how that may have changed in this, the workings to this second EIS or the revised EIS?
Yeah, probably the main element is the expert flood panel and the recommendations. They did a huge amount of review, and then they had a reviewer of the reviewer, so to speak. So they engaged with ourselves, like councils and the councils and Goondiwindi as well as where local property owners were happy to engage. They engaged with those persons as well. So that's been probably from an input perspective. From an output of what has changed, quite a number of the crossings have been lengthened quite considerably, both from trying to mitigate afflux issues, but also the geomorphology elements of some of the soils through the condamine, roadability and those sorts of issues. I'm trying to mitigate that, particularly where piers and different things are put in the across the floodplain. They've also taken on board a lot of what we've given in feedback quite a number of years ago now, a few years back, in respect to our road rail interfaces, at the interfaces, those localised drainage issues. So, which has been positive to see that take up and mitigate the impacts from those changes that are going to happen with stormwater flows, flood flows and the like. So it is quite a different rail line that's going to go across or through our region compared to the small little low rail line that you see when you travel along the Gore Highway today. It'll be quite substantially different. And as has been mentioned, if anybody does cross the border down past Moree to Narrabri or something like that along the Newell Highway at the moment, you can quite readily see what will be sort of replicated up in our region.
Thank you, Mike. I do appreciate that. And I guess an encouragement perhaps to UniSQ in regard to a submission, private submission from them in regard to Mount Kent might be worthwhile mentioning. Councillor Shine?
Thanks, Chair. Just arising out of Luca's comment in relation to Mount Kent, just a question as to whether or not there is any difference in the effect on Mount Kent, likely effect or any effect on Mount Kent from where the positioning of the current route is as opposed to the suggested 1 kilometre outside Pittsworth would be.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councillor. The short answer is probably no. It hasn't been assessed in us making the request to the Coordinator General in the submission, but at the sort of distances we're talking, I don't think it will have a material impact on light from the project.
Thanks very much. Councillor Tim?
Yeah, thanks, comment? Chair. Wondering if I could ask a question, another one. Just obviously the main concern for this chamber is around people and Pittsworth and Brookstead, and we've asked for it to be moved at least 1 kilometre further away. But I also wanted to talk through impacts on wildlife, native fauna and flora that reside in that area of where the Inland Rail is looking to go. There is some excellent work in our submission as put together by our consultants regarding that, but my original reading of the EIS from Inland Rail, it had a part on cumulative impacts, and my reading of that is it was very thorough. It had every project that I knew about and every project I didn't know about in this area. But my question to them was, surely all of these projects together should form a cumulative impact that would make it a higher risk to the valuable koala habitat, to the matters of state environmental significance that are in those areas. Now, in our submission, and I'm talking especially about part 132 on page 81, we look at the idea that the cumulative impacts are qualified but not quantified, and we haven't added them up properly. And so we're asking them, this will include consultation with TRC us to clearly identify measures to avoid, retain or mitigate clearing particular areas of remnant vegetation or of concern, and we talk in some detail there, especially about specific areas of koala habitat there. So I'm wondering if, my first question is around this consultation with us. So they don't have to do it. We're asking them to do it. They could just go, nah, we're happy. I'm wondering if you think we need to make the words, please consult with us, stronger to in that whole area.
Hand over to you.
Thank you.
Hand over to you, Will.
So just to explain that comment and to give some context, so we've identified in that central column the commitment that Inland Rail have made. So Inland Rail note in the revised draft EIS that they have addressed matters of national and state environmental significance. As many councillors in the room would be aware, council does not currently have a matters of local environmental significance overlay or prescribed in the planning scheme. However, they do acknowledge that council has areas of environmental significance which predates the current MLES framework at a state level. So they've identified that they will include consultation with TRC to identify measures to avoid or mitigate remnant vegetation, which is a state regulated matter. However, it is often covered by council's mapping. So they've identified those areas, those weren't ones identified by us. I was not satisfied in review of this commitment that it would adequately address council's technical concerns, and the comment in the column on the right is what we have sought for the OCG to impose to address that to an adequate level to where the project would, on balance, result in a net benefit to any areas of environmental significance impacted by council. And the approach that we've sought to take is that for every square metre that the project intersects any of council's mapped areas of environmental significance, areas of environmental significance buffer, waterways, waterway buffer, and regional biodiversity corridors, which is what's currently mapped under the planning scheme, we've sought, regardless of whether that area currently contains vegetation or not, if it's under the overlay, we would like 3 square metres of revegetation for every impact to a square metre of that overlay impacted. So if they're impacting 5 hectares of mapped areas of environmental significance, we would like to see 15 hectares revegetated, so actual trees going in the ground, and we have sought for that revegetation work to be completed within 2 kilometres of the impact footprint. And I note that this is generally in accordance with the approach that's been taken on local development. So we're seeking for the same way that local proponents are being treated for a project of this significance to also carry itself with the same weight.
No, thanks very much for the answer, and I welcome it, and I welcome your thoughts on that being included in this submission. But if I could just have a follow-up, Chair, that the offsets are 3-1. So this is also in the report on page 27, Article 41, where we basically say we're not satisfied that they're to the level we would like. There's offsets and there's offsets. And the last thing I like to sign off on is offsets that are nowhere near the project and are not connected to the project, but they go tick offset. So we're not happy with the offsets as well in section 41. Can you talk on our proposal towards that?
Yes, absolutely. So thank you, Councillor. The comment that we've referred to there is a mitigation action. We also provide commentary on the environmental offsets that they're proposing to provide for impacts on prescribed environmental matters, so matters of national environmental significance and matters of state environmental significance. A well-known impact associated with it is koala, which is regulated by both state and Commonwealth. In review of their environmental offset strategy, we have detected that they're proposing to utilise almost a credit in their offset by focusing on what's called an averted habitat loss. So within their offset design, they essentially are saying that if the offset wasn't put, so if a fence wasn't put around the land that they're proposing to use as an offset, its habitat would continue to degrade over time. Now, many of you in the room would be quite familiar with these areas. They're often areas that were historically cleared, and they're actually regenerating over time in some areas, depending on the landholder management. So we're actually seeing naturally the habitat in these areas if it's largely left untouched, it actually improves over time. It doesn't necessarily degrade. So we have rejected, I suppose, their technical assumptions that habitat in those offset areas is degrading and that they should receive a credit for that. So we've identified that all of their environmental offset achievements from a state or Commonwealth perspective need to be delivered through actual on-ground actions, replanting, weed management, pest management, rather than just putting a fence around it and saying that that averts a habitat loss, because to impact those matters anyway would require approval at state or Commonwealth level potentially, and these areas are improving or staying at a consistent habitat level rather than degrading, which is their assumption. So if the Office of Coordinator General supports our technical comments, we would expect the offset area that's managed to approximately double. So approximately half of their current habitat gain that they claim is through that credit type approach. So we haven't supported that in their offset approach.
Great. Thanks very much for that. I welcome that. And back to the page 81, if they could consult with us moving forward, that would be really good. Gee, I just have one more on a different subject. Is it all right to ask now? Thanks. It's probably not on environment related. It may be to Lucas or our ISG team. We've said many times that the alignment is too close to Brookstead and Pittsworth and asked for it to be moved at least 1 kilometre away in section 29. What I just wanted to pick up on page 75 of the report, section 120, there is a commentary around hazards with things like derailment of train close to town. So if we got roaring trains at 1.8 k's long at 100 k's plus, just the risk of them coming off the train tracks near town is increased. So why is that increased near towns? Can you just have an answer on that part of the? So in the middle of nowhere versus next to Pittsworth or Brookstead.
Thanks, Lucas.
All right, thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Councillor. So not necessarily suggesting it's the risk of derailment increases in towns, but it's more the risk of the impact from a derailment in town. And I think looking at their risk assessment, when you look at, they've got various scenarios around whether it's a dangerous goods carrying train and it derails and there's an explosion or a chemical release, perhaps if they were carrying something hazardous, or if it's just the physical effects of a derailment through collisions with vehicles or others. So at the moment, there remains a medium risk to communities. When you look at their risk of derailment, they go from a high risk through to a medium risk. When they factor in whatever risk mitigation measures, it's not clear how they go from a high risk to a medium risk, but there's still a medium residual risk. So having a high speed, double stacked freight train that close to areas where you've got more people congregating. So it's just a concern that, and sort of adding to what Mike Brady said earlier, it's this additive effect where there's an increased level of, there is a risk around train movements with safety risks. There is traffic implications, there's noise, it's an additive effect that can have. So those effects are felt, they're more pronounced when you've got with more people. So similar to Councillor O'Shea's comments before, it's sort of trying to minimise the impact on the most amount of people.
Yeah, no, thanks very much for answering that. That's great clarification. We again and again we ask through this, and it's going back to section 29 that Councillor Shine put up there before. It's the main place where it says the Coordinator General must condition the proponent to provide alternative alignments at Brookstead and Pittsworth that are acceptable to Council for mitigating safety. Well, that's that section we talked about. Social noise we've talked about, lighting we've talked about, vibration we've talked about. There is one other section within the our submission, and that's section 100, Article 121, that actually talks about health risks when you're living there and sleep deprived, and probably a cumulative effect of all of them. That little blurb of all of the risks we have, and noting that's repeated many times throughout our submission, doesn't say health in that. Do you think it should, or are we happy that it falls under those other categories of safety, social noise, lighting and vibration?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councillor. It's a good point. So yes, around that hazard and risk discussion, there is introduced the potential health impacts. So one matter we feel that could be addressed further by the proponent is around silica dust, crystalline silica dust, I should mention. It's touched on very briefly in the submission, more so from the EIS, I should say, more so from the construction phase where there's greater dust generation. During the operational phase, the level of dust generated will be substantially less, but there is brief mention of potential for coal trains to utilise that potential section of the inland rail alignment. Coal trains introduce a potential dust source. If not managed correctly through dust suppression techniques, there can be potentially other materials carried. So whilst it's probably going to be still a lower risk, the crystalline silica, which is the risk attached to the engineered stone, is the greatest risk. It can still be an environmental exposure if you've got a train coming through every hour carrying something that is getting dusty. So whilst I think it would still probably come out as a low risk through the operational phase, I think it's something the proponent can address further just to give that comfort that it won't be a material risk to the community. And the other sort of health and safety risk that we mentioned is around sleep deprivation. That's something that we are concerned about. So like we mentioned, 44 decibels is where the World Health Organization thinks it can kick in. 55 is where the proponent is willing to take action. So houses between 44 and 55 decibels, and we presented a graph recently to show the cluster of dwellings in Brookstead and Pittsworth that sit in that zone, which wouldn't be eligible for mitigation, but potentially would experience the effects. And it's not to say people getting less than 44 wouldn't experience sleep disturbance, or those above 55, maybe it won't bother them. It obviously is an individual, it's an individual thing.
So there's Article 121's up there now, and it's got that same comment there. The Coordinator General must condition the proponent to provide alternative alignments. Do you think we need health in there as a reason? And I don't propose, Chair, that we need to be altering motions, but adequately avoid health is in there. In the other one, sorry, it is different. In the other one, in Article 20, do you think we need to put health in our overall reasons why we want it moved, or you're happy with it the way it is?
We can certainly add it there. It's not a problem. It adds to that the broader argument of the issues that we foresee. So that's not a problem.
Thank you, Chair.
That would fall into the second part of the motion, I'd say. Councillor Shine.
Quick one on rising out of that, Lucas. How would the health effects of the track here be any worse than what they might be in the passenger routes through Brisbane, which has far more trains and far often and throughout the day and night?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. I don't know the exact answer to your question. I'm sorry. I guess they're very different style of train, different speed, different frequencies, and different pass-by times. But yes, in Brisbane you would have substantially greater number of receptors close to these lines.
Thank you. Councillor Bill, question?
Just a brief comment, Chair. I do hope the Coordinator General takes very seriously our comments around cumulative impacts. After all, this is a national freight route, should be the most efficient, not just from a time perspective, but a total risk perspective. We've seen lots of public infrastructure installed over many decades and many legacies left. So making comparisons with existing infrastructure doesn't really cut it when you're trying to look at best practice. It makes me wonder why they're going across black soil plain, floodplain. I'm not going to win that one, but we can throw lots of taxpayers' dollars to solve a problem, and engineers are good at solving problems if you have enough money. It doesn't mean to say it's necessarily from a longevity point of view it's got to stand the test of time, infrastructure. So I do hope, just as a comment, that they really do seriously take cumulative impacts into account rather than isolated, because in other sectors they're still back in the dark ages considering isolated impacts from EISs for separate projects and separate issues. So just a comment.
If I could just add to that.
Sure,
Lucas. Chair. Just briefly, Councillor Cole, the proponent has shown the willingness to amend alignments. So between the draft EIS and the revised draft EIS, there has been a fairly substantial change at Millmerran to avoid a large piggery there. So we're hoping that that level of consideration and concern for a business can be applied to large townships, just given the number of impacts that can be associated with the project.
Thanks, Lucas. Councillor Tim?
There is a recommendation. I'm actually happy to move it.
You're happy to move it? Okay, I just wanted to check.
An opportunity to
I just wanted to check whether Edwina or Gary, you're comfortable. Don't want to ask any questions or anything. So, Councillor Tim, you're happy to move it. That will be your chance to talk to it. You're happy with that? Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Councillor Gary. There we go. Anyone wishing to speak against this motion? Councillor Shine. So we'll go into debate. Therefore, Councillor Tim, away you go.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome the debate. But colleagues, can I congratulate us on the work we as elected reps have put in? Can I congratulate our officers and our consultants on the work that has been put into this? Because I've sat here through many a development application where we scrutinise every tree, every window, and we have a significant, nationally significant rail corridor going through our region that is going to, by 2040, carry one train every hour to almost 1.8 k's long per train, going 100 kilometres plus. And so what do we do about it? For those listening at home, we're not here to approve Inland Rail. They've done an EIS, and it's our job to write our submission to their EIS. It is thorough, it is detailed, it's 88 pages long, and again I congratulate our team on getting this done. I had some significant concerns with some of the details in Inland Rail, noting that I support strongly the overall idea. The issues to people, especially along the townships of Brookstead and Pittsworth, with noise, vibration, sleep disturbances, health risks and other issues associated. I had significant problems in their original EIS, and I did attempt to read the 1,800 pages of it. I didn't read them all, it was a long gig, but I have issues with offsets, koala habitat, significant vegetation, and how that's been managed. I feel like all of my issues, all of my suggestions, all of my ideas are adequately encapsulated in this work, 88 pages, and therefore my opinion on this is in line with Council's opinion on this, which is why I'm very happy to move the motion. So we are approving our submission, Council's point of view on this draft environmental impact statement. I think we owe it to our residents along the south to have done this work. That's how we can best represent them and give this to the Coordinator General. The wording is must change, not asked to change, and I support that as well. So colleagues, I'm overall very happy with the work that has been done here. Thank you again to our team, and I'm happy to move it.
Thanks, Councillor Tim. Against? Councillor Shine, to speak against it?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Well, first of all, can I join with Councillor McMahon in congratulating all those who have made a huge effort to respond to this issue, and including the consultants involved, but also, of course, the officers who have spent a great deal of time and effort on preparing a detailed and no doubt expert submission. My reason for opposing it really is to vent the concerns that I had that I've raised in the questions in relation to the effect on the farming community of Pittsworth. For first of all, economic reasons, we would see quite a number of farms made probably economically difficult to operate in terms of having a rail line through the middle of them. And also taking into account that Pittsworth itself is a town based on the agricultural wealth of the surrounding farming community. And I'm sure that whilst residents may feel that their enjoyment of life might be affected by that rail going on alongside the Gore Highway, they would be also appreciative of the fact that that the farm, or be sympathetic to the fact that the farmers would be adversely affected. The number of reasons that we've talked about today, chief, I think, is the road safety aspect of it. I mentioned 8 roads. Looking at it a bit more closely, there's 3 more. Linthorpe Road, Luck Road and Geitz Road would no doubt be affected as well. So you'd have about 11 crossings of some sort that inherently raises the road safety aspect over and above what would be there with the proposed inland rail current route. The noise factor has been a major issue. I think, hopefully I'm not verballing Lucas, but I think at the end of the day, he said there would be a slight difference between the noise of the train on top of the road transports that go up and down. I think you're nodding agreement there. I made a note of what you said, and no doubt Chair will allow you to correct that if I've got that wrong. Don't mean to, but I got the impression it wasn't going to be a huge difference. And I know whilst our General Manager indicated that barriers would be pretty high, we see them particularly on the road to the Gold Coast. I think they seem to work well from a layman's point of view, and I would have thought, bearing in mind that Pittsworth, the extent of north from east to west of Pittsworth, the length of it isn't extraordinarily long. It would not be a huge engineering task to erect those as well. The environment, there's apparently no evidence of, well, there's been no investigation of what environmental damage might be occurring to the proposed route as opposed to the existing inland rail route. One assumes, there would be, but we have it's an uncertain situation. We don't seem to have any modelling on what the flood results might be by going a kilometre inland, and apparently there's no difference with respect to the light situation with Mount Kent, and with the health situation, well, we don't know whether that's any different to residents of Brisbane with their multitude of passenger trains, etc., going through there. So for all of those reasons, I inclined to oppose, although I suspect that that's not the way the question will be decided.
Councillor Shine, did you want clarification from Lucas in regard to your statement? If it's contrary, just from a completeness, Councillor Shine raised the question.
That's right. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Shine. The noise impacts will be quite different from the road road noise currently experienced by receptors versus the trains. They're different sort of noise source, different frequencies and different durations. I guess just one thing, going back to where we started with the earlier comments, that this is a request or a suggestion from Council to the Coordinator General. Ultimately, it's up to them to determine whether this is a reasonable request to put on the proponent. The proponent will then have to demonstrate that leaving it in the current alignment can be done sustainably and the impacts aren't unacceptable. So I guess, yeah, it's a position council can put forward. It's a position council's put forward in the past. And I guess with the revised draft EOS at hand, there is more information to help support that request. But ultimately, it does fall to the Coordinator General to determine whether it's reasonable to place that imposition on the proponent.
Thanks. That covers off the question. Speaker in favour of the motion? Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And I thank our team. I think we've got an amazing, I think we've covered everything. It's not without concerns that I speak in favour of this motion. I think we need to be very cognizant of what this is going to do. It's probably 50 years too late. If Inland Rail doesn't go ahead, then we will have double, at least, the number of trucks on road infrastructure that actually exists, and I don't see anything that causes me to think that that road infrastructure is going to be upgraded in any way. It'll be a risk to road safety, to degradation of roads that we have, to degradation of environment, and also to quality of the air. When USQ did a study here some years ago for council, when there was thought that the coal that was coming through town and on trucks as well as rail, when it was thought that that was having emissions, black all over houses and other things that were happening, the result of that study that was done by USQ found that the black that was on houses, buildings and things was caused by diesel fumes and tyre and bitumen that came off the road as those trucks went past. Now, trucks are getting bigger, safer, bigger, heavier, to try to stay relevant to the economic pressures that are now on moving agricultural produce to the port. And it doesn't matter whether you send, Mr Brady was talking about grain coming through Thallon. What mostly comes on special trains from Thallon, Durham-Bandy, St George and out that way is when they have a huge chickpea harvest, and it comes from there on special trains straight to the port. Now, if that had to come on trucks, if you think about everything in the future, doubling, Bernard Salt said down at the national conference that we need to increase our agricultural produce production by at least 40%. How is that going to get carried to the port? How is that going to go? It'll go in trucks if we haven't got inland rail. And, you know, we're trying to have a balance here, but certainly by not having the rail, we're going to have more impacts on air quality, on road safety, on amenity, on all of those things, because all of that has to then go on the roads, which are breaking up now. The Gore Highway is the most disgraceful example of a federal road that I've ever seen, ever. There's not one passing lane all the way from Millmerran to Waiaga, and it's the national highway and carries the highest level of produce, I think, anywhere in the country. So we have to, as Mr Brady said, this is transformational. It is something that is going to help our producers because it'll, wherever they take their produce to, 75% of that cost, doesn't matter if they go to Iceland, 75% of that cost is incurred inside this country. So for them to be productive and to be able to compete on a world market, we've got the best farmers in the world here, but we add to their expenses by carriage to the ports. So, I mean, I know there are concerns about this. I've spoken about them. We've got, we have an opportunity here to put our concerns forward. We can't with the road. It's already there. And if we double what's on it now, it's going to be a far worse outcome than we're going to have if we have inland rail. As a matter of fact, it should have happened at least 20 years ago. So we cannot, our community cannot afford to have double what we have now inside the next 10, 15 years carrying produce on our road. We cannot do that, and we do have to have inland rail. This country has lost the opportunity many years ago to benefit from the railway line that it has. They couldn't even agree on a gauge. So at the end of the day, we've got opportunity to plan this. We have opportunity, put forward our concerns, and we hope that the Coordinator General handles at least those. But one thing is for certain, for our agricultural produce to be competitive on the world market, for our farmers to make a decent living, for us to feed the world as we do, we need to have inland rail to carry the produce. Thank you.
Councillor Carroll. Speaker against? No further speaker against. Councillor Tim, you'd like to sum up?
Thank you, Chair. Colleagues, it was the 1860s when the government of the day brought prosperity to the Darling Downs and Western Queensland through the use of rail. I find it fascinating that we're sitting here 170 years later talking about prosperity to our region through rail. I welcome it. I think the Inland Rail of Australia will be a nationally significant piece of infrastructure that will benefit this region greatly. Our job today is to provide insight to the EIS, and I think we've done that remarkably well. The comment that mirrors over and over and over through our submission is the Coordinator General must condition the proponent to provide alternative alignments at Brookstead and Pittsworth that are acceptable to Council for mitigating the safety, social, noise, lighting, air, vibration, and we've added health impacts to the people, current and future residents of those towns. And I think that's a tremendous place that we are saying on behalf of our residents, mixed with the many other issues that we've raised, Mount Kent, the flooding north of Millmerran, the fauna and flora impacts. I think this is a tremendous submission for a tremendous project. So I put the motion. Thank you.
I'll be happy to put the motion. Thanks. You've moved the motion, and Councillor Gary has seconded the motion. So we'll now put the motion. Those in favour of the motion before you. Those against, like your motion recorded, Councillor Shine. We'll record Councillor Shine's vote against the motion. That concludes the afternoon's special meeting. Yes, no.
Sorry, Chair, I just record my vote that I was in favour.
In favour, that's fine. Thanks, Beck. Grabbed it. So that concludes the afternoon. Thank you very much, everyone. Do appreciate it. See you tomorrow.